What's up, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, NVIDIA, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers. I'm going to break down what's happening with the economic calendar approaching tomorrow as we have more data coming out, not to mention a new trend on the charts. Just know that I am not a financial planner, so make sure you take nothing I say as financial advice whatsoever. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $2,000, you're guaranteed 30 in total. And the offer ends very soon at the end of March. Anyways, as far as the market's going, SPY was trying to get a bounce this morning, retesting this yellow trend line of resistance. So as you guys can see, we got this rejection right over here off the trend line. Rejection again, rejection again, rejection again. We broke through this, trying to hit new all-time highs, only to get a big rejection. We retested the trend line. Instead of breaking through this and continuing to run, we got a rejection again. So we tried to bounce. There was this bounce attempt in the morning, but it failed so far. And we saw SPY return not only to our 200 EMA, but below that, which is showing even more weakness. So for now, the bears have a bigger edge and we're below our key support. The question is what's going to happen from this point on. I'll talk more about this in just a couple of minutes. I first want to talk about the charts. So just know that as far as the market's going, we're seeing a market-wide sell-off. It's not just like SPY and the QQQ. We're actually seeing like NVIDIA down, Google, Meta, Microsoft, Amazon, Tesla, the majority of tech stocks are in the red. Some sectors are flat, such as like health, technology, and finance. Finance saw a little bit more, I would say, like flat price action, very mixed because of Berkshire Hathaway, which had earnings. They beat some expectations. They ended up raising their guidance, so it was actually quite good. So good guidance from Berkshire is what helped this overall sector to some extent. And besides that, that's the reason why we saw this volatility. Now, one thing that's coming up in the future is going to be this. We have Donald Trump announcing his tariffs very, very soon. Right now, there's about a 10% tariff that's been imposed on Chinese goods, with some exceptions here and there. That took place on February 4th. Then we have the Canadian and Mexican ones coming out possibly very soon. There's going to be a 25% tariff on most goods and 10% of Canadian energy, including petroleum and natural gas. Now, this has been delayed up until March 4th, which is very soon, right? It's about 8 days from now, very, very soon, about a week away from now. This is going to be very important. So we'll see what Donald Trump is planning. Could this be another negotiation tactic, or is Donald Trump officially going to be imposing them? We'll have to wait and see. Then we have 25% steel and aluminum imports coming out, or 25% steel and aluminum tariffs coming out, excuse me, guys, very, very soon. They're taking effect on March 12th. That's going to be important, at least for now. I'm sure Donald Trump is like very fixated on this, and he argues that he wants steel to be produced more in the U.S. He wants to bring back manufacturing to the U.S. We'll see if that ends up panning out or not, but that's what's in store for the time being. Then we have the reciprocal tariffs. The deadline is going to be April 1st. So this is what's been said by the White House, statements by Donald Trump, and also according to Bloomberg News. So with that being said, March is going to be a very volatile time for the markets with all this tariff news. The tariff news is going to be back, especially next week. So make sure you guys are ready. We're approaching the end of February, and so far the market's in a very volatile place. And then we'll see what happens with all these tariffs. Get ready for some high volatility. Keep in mind that that's what's leading to some fears amongst businesses. If you guys look at the PMI report from last week, that's why we saw fears about prices going up and factors like that. But going into Tuesday, which is going to be tomorrow, we have Logan from the Fed giving a speech in the morning. Then we have some manufacturing numbers again at 10 o'clock a.m. So we'll see what this data looks like. Look for some volatility tomorrow at 10 o'clock a.m. as we have the Richmond Fed manufacturing shipments and revenue reports all coming out. And then we finally have another Fed speaker later on. We have Barr and Barkin giving speeches. But the main thing is going to be volatility at 10 o'clock a.m. and 10:30 as we have some data coming out. Right now, the market is seeing a big increase in fear. We're very close to extreme fear as there's lots of sellers who are stepping in. Momentum is also at extreme fear. There's a lot of fear right now. Looking at other factors, the put to call option ratio is at fear. We're seeing this going up as there's more put buying that's continuing. The VIX is breaking out very close to the 20 area, so it still looks a bit more bullish for now. And then last but not least, we also happen to have our junk bond demand. It's also starting to go up just a little bit, not really affecting us as much as before, but that's something that's worth mentioning. So with that being said, there's fear, lots of fear in the markets. People are concerned about latest pieces of data. People are concerned about inflation going up. And that's having a big effect in the way in which equities are being traded. Now, keep in mind, there was some big news that came out for Apple. They announced on Monday they're going to be investing more than $500 billion into the US over the next 4 years amidst the tariffs coming out. They want to hire 20,000 people and build a new server factory in Texas. That's huge news. However, just keep in mind that with that coming out, that's part of why Apple's a little bit stronger than the markets. And then there's been a lot of talk about Nvidia. Don't forget that Nvidia has earnings very soon. That's going to be the big make or break for the stock market. And I'll talk about that in just a second. Just remember that later on, we did talk about Berkshire Hathaway's earnings in the morning. Tomorrow, I'll give you guys an update about what's happening with the Home Depot and Planet Fitness and these other ones like AMC. We also have Lucid announcing earnings tomorrow. They have very luxurious EVs. And then for Wednesday, it's going to be a crazy day. In the morning, we have Lowe's and some retail. Then we have lots of AI stocks. We have AI, CRM, Snow, and then finally NVIDIA. That's going to be a big one. Get ready for NVIDIA, guys. That's going to be huge. This is going to be the biggest factor for the markets in a very, very long time. If NVIDIA does well and the share price explodes to the upside, that could help the market bounce. If not, if NVIDIA gets a big rug pull, and if NVIDIA dumps really hard, that's going to drag the market even lower. That's going to be the big catalyst for now. So with that being said, let's talk about the charts. What do I see from this point on? Honestly, guys, looking at the charts, we're looking a little bit more bearish considering the overall trend. We had a high up here at 613. We came down at a lower high, came down at a lower high. We're continuing to make lower highs and lower lows as lots of fears continuing to, emerge in the markets. Now, could the fear subside? It could, but that depends on different factors. I also want to call out when you look at SPY, at least on the daily time frame, we have this gap down here. There's a giant gap down here around this 584 area. Now, if we lose the low at 590, I do expect us to fill that gap pretty easily. If we don't, then this could try to bounce anyway. So it all depends on NVIDIA's earnings. I would say that if NVIDIA does poorly and we get not the best of guidances, that could cause us to fill this gap. That's a potential catalyst. If not, we could still bounce, so we'll have to see about that. What do I see for the short term, though? Regardless of NVIDIA, I just want to mention that for now, SPY is on a downtrend. We're making lower highs and lower lows. For the shorter term, and I want to mention that we're losing our 200 EMA. So if you're bullish on SPY, you need to see it reclaim 599.5. We need to see this thing try to bounce to get back above our 200 EMA at 599.5. If we reclaim that, we're looking for an attempt for 602 for a nice bounce. If we're bearish, you want to see SPY basically hit our 200 EMA and reject and make a move back down to about 594. We also have an imbalance down here very close to the 590 area, so we could go a little bit lower, but then that would likely be like very close to NVIDIA's earnings if we do dump that low, and then we'll see, does NVIDIA cause us to make a comeback, or do we end up continuing to reject? It all depends on NVIDIA's earnings, okay? So what is the trend right now? It's very simple. We pumped to an all-time high and rejected. We made a lower high on Friday, came down, lower high today. We tried to break down. We got a rejection off this historical resistance. The market does not forget about resistances. We had this resistance rejected, rejected, rejected. Now this time around, the yellow trend line is rejecting us, so we rejected again. So the trend is we might try to see a little comeback tomorrow. We might even try to retest 599 in a move like this. If we do gap up, it's going to be very, very nice, but unfortunately, even if we do see a little pop here, if we can't hold above 599.5, we're going to be at risk of touching 594 to 590. I do see us potentially dipping down here right now. That's what the trend is suggesting. Unless we get back above this yellow resistance, if we could get back above that, we could try a bounce, but we're not really there. We're still looking bearish. So we're favoring 594 below, and then we'll see if we bounce or not. But for now, we're looking a bit more bearish, making lower highs and lower lows. So look for 594 below, and we'll see if we bounce. I see SPY potentially dipping lower for the time being. Look for a pump in the morning. We love to do that. We did this 3 days in a row. We kind of like pumped and dipped, pumped and dipped, pumped and dipped. So look for a pump to retest our 200 EMA around 599, then a rejection, and move down to about 594. Keep in mind, this is just the price action approaching NVIDIA's earnings. This does not mean we're going to be crashing forever. It depends on NVIDIA. The QQQ is also going to be very dependent on NVIDIA, but notice that if we don't end up breaking these lows, there's still the possibility of this being a cup and handle. Not a guarantee, though. It all depends on NVIDIA's earnings, of course, but we'll talk about that. So if we are bullish on the QQQ, and just notice the trend is basically the same as SPY. We had this high. We came close to all-time highs. Rejected. Got a big rejection move on Friday. Made a lower high today. Big rejection move. I anticipate we either gap up or push back up to like 522 to 525 again. Then we could reject and start dipping for like 516, if not all the way down towards this imbalance, which is around that 512 area. So there's going to be a risk of us dipping even lower looking at the current trend, at least approaching Nvidia's earnings, and we'll see how that ends up reacting to it. Looking at the daily, we look at relatively weak on the QQQ. If you look at like the daily time frame, it's still quite bearish, a very bearish looking setup on the daily for now. We also have a gap over here. I think there's this gap to fill, so we'll see how it goes. So I could be looking for some of these gaps to be retested. There's a risk of more downside in the charts, and I think we're favoring making new lows compared to this. So that's just approaching Nvidia's earnings. Things could change after earnings come out, but I do anticipate a retest of 522 to 525 in the morning, then a continuation lower for like 516, if not 512 is the most likely case. So that's the most likely possibility unless we get back above like 525. We do favor downside, so keep that in mind. For the IWM Russell 2000, we are trying to get back above 218. If we break that, we're looking for essentially 220. If we don't hold above 218, we could continue to fall back down for like 215, if not towards these lows around 214.25. Looking at the trend, we had a high here, came down, lower high, came down, lower high, came down. So look for a retest of 218, then a rejection, back down for like 214 or below. And there's going to be a risk of us dipping lower for like 214. So keep that in mind as we look a bit more bearish. There's still some downside risk on the chart. On ES, we're looking bearish because we're losing this trend line. So this yellow trend line was resistance. We rejected, rejected, rejected. We broke through it, okay, just temporarily. And instead of continuing to hold above it, we're rejecting again. And now we're starting to lose it. So what happened today was we got this big rejection on ES, right? We tried to get back above the trend line. There are buyers who were trying to defend it, and they failed. We came right back down. So tomorrow, maybe we try to push for like 6,020 if we can't get back above this yellow trend line. If we can't hold above this, we could reject and start dumping even lower, taking us down to where this imbalance is. So look for 6,000. If it does not hold, we're going to be at risk of dipping to about 59.80, all the way down here close to this imbalance. 59.80 to 59.68 is likely coming as we're making lower highs. And for now, we are favoring the downwards direction. So I do favor downside for the time being for ES, making lower highs and lower lows. We could pop and then reject as the most likely case, especially with this imbalance down here. So 59.80 to 59.60 is a very, very strong possibility. For NQ, we are rejecting and losing this support right here. Now, one thing that's good is that NQ was trying to hold above this trend line. It was trying to, but it got a rejection. You guys can see how we kind of pushed right here, trying to get back above the blue trend line. We just got a rejection instead. So the trend is more bearish. Now we have this support where this wick is at 21,400. We're barely at it. If that fails us, I could be looking for us to dip all the way down towards the 21,300 area. That's going to be coming next. The trend is the same thing as ES, SPY, and the others, right? We had lower highs and lower lows being made consistently for the last couple of days. I wouldn't be surprised if we push it for like 21,500 and continue to dip to 21,300 or below. For a little bit more downside approaching NVIDIA's earnings, I still find that to be a very strong possibility. So please keep that in mind. For Bitcoin, we're looking bearish. We are losing 94,000. If that does not hold us, we could be dipping to 92,000 flat. So I think there's a good chance of us dipping lower, making a lower high here. So 92,000 could be coming very soon as it looks a bit more bearish. For NVIDIA, NVIDIA is looking a little bit weaker. Now, here's the good thing about NVIDIA. We have the possibility of a slanted inverse head and shoulders approaching its earnings. This would give some hope for the markets, at least temporarily, right? This could be like a left shoulder right here. This would be like a head, and then we could be forming like a right shoulder before we try to bounce like this after earnings. That's a possibility, right? I would never rule that out. I would never count NVIDIA out, if anything. But that's not guaranteed. It depends on earnings. And for now, we do look a little bit more bearish on the chart, especially as we're losing our key supports. So to be bullish on NVIDIA, you want to see it get back above 134. If we reclaim 134, we're looking for a bounce. As long as we're below 134, we're still favoring the downwards direction. And this is going to likely continue to downtrend. I could be looking for a retest of this resistance near 133-ish. If we can't hold above 134, then it could just reject from there and continue to fall back down for essentially that 128 area all the way down here. That could be coming. So just keep that in mind, guys. There's a very, very good chance that could be coming soon. And we could be dipping for essentially 128 to 126. We'll see how that ends up reacting, but keep that in mind. Tesla's looking bearish. Why is that? Well, the overall trend when you zoom out is bearish. Why? Let's remove everything. We had a high here, came down, lower high, lower low, lower high, lower low, lower high, lower low, lower high, lower low. right? It's continuing to just reject over and over again. We love to form these rejections, and it's not looking too great. When you add our indicators and lines, let's just add a little bit more of them. You will see that Tesla is just continuing to reject over and over again. But I'm going to be watching this support right here. So if you actually look at this carefully, we have a very, very interesting trend that's developing here. If I take a rectangle like this, you guys can see that this is where our next support is going to be. But there's a good chance we're going to be revisiting this rectangle, and we will just continue to fall once that support is retested. I think what's going to happen to Tesla is quite simple. Every morning we do the same thing as SPY and the others. We pump and reject, pump and reject, pump and reject. It happened 3-4 times. So the same thing is going to likely continue in this case. There might be a retest of our liquidity area right over here around this like 335 area. And if we get a rejection from there, we're looking at these lows right here. So that would take us back down towards like 325. So 325 would likely be coming. And if that fails us, I could be looking for us to dip below 320. It's still looking kind of weak right now, unfortunately, and I do see us making equal lows very soon, retesting these lows. So be prepared for some more downside on Tesla, unfortunately, despite the good news that came out about their FSD expanding to China. That's still not the best of news, at least so far. So we're continuing to see the overall market having its toll on Tesla. It could also because of fears. It could be because of fears about these tariffs. That could be another factor. So there's still weakness on the chart. Apple's looking a little bit more bullish because of how they're investing more into the US and because of more buyers that stepped in. Inverse head and shoulders like setup. We need to hold 244. If we're above 244, we're favoring that we might get closer to 250. If we lose 244, we're going to be dumping back down to 240. So it all depends on 244. For now, it's a little bit more bullish, but it's very flat. So I think it kind of consolidates up here. If it doesn't hold and the market continues to fall, we could be retesting 244. But I'm not bearish until we lose that. So for now, we're still outperforming the market, looking relatively strong. For the rest of these, we were expecting Netflix to retest this trend line. We did not bounce off of this, unfortunately. We're actually showing weakness instead. So just like the rest of the market, I'm anticipating a downwards move like this, a retest of like 990 and potentially coming back down for like 975. A little bit more downside is due, so just keep that in mind. MSTR, it's on a bit of a downtrend. We had a high here, making lower highs and lower lows. We were expecting it to dip a little bit more. And with that being said, there's this gap all the way down to about the low 270s that's likely going to get filled. So I anticipate that 275 and 275 are likely coming as we're making lower lows and lower highs. We could pump here and then reject and start dipping for like the low 270s. So keep that in mind. For Celsius, exactly as predicted, we're making lower highs and lower lows. I do anticipate it's going to be retesting 30 flat. 30 could be a psychological level, or at least 29 to 30, which is where our 20 EMA is going to be. And we'll see if we bounce off this. If we don't hold that, then we do come back down to fill this imbalance at 25. Expect a little bit more downside on Celsius, and we'll see what kind of reaction we get. Supermicro is looking a bit more bearish as we're approaching 48.08. 48.04, excuse me. I do expect us to dip a little bit more for the 48s, and we'll see what kind of reaction we get. It's dipping with NVIDIA, but NVIDIA's earnings could affect this, but look for a little bit more downside for the 48s. Palantir is going to likely be retesting 87.8. If that fails us, we're going to be filling this gap back down to the low 80s. It does look a bit more bearish. We need to get back above at least the 96 area to bounce. Otherwise, we're favoring even more downside. Rivian is getting rejection after this big wick that formed. We're continuing to reject. Unfortunately, after earnings came out, this just rejected, has not been able to bounce since. I was expecting 12.5 in the low 12s. We actually went below that, so it's weaker than expected. There's a big support right here around this 11.8-ish area. So even if we get a bounce into the low 12s, we could continue to fall back down for 11.5. Still looks bearish to me. SoFi is rejecting. There's no sign of a big bounce yet, and we're continuing to fall. So I'll be watching to see what happens if we end up retesting 14.5-ish. We're very close to this imbalance before it continues to make lower highs. And we could be falling below 14 as we're making lower highs and lower lows. So just keep that in mind. That's a very, very strong possibility. I also want to note that SoFi has a head and shoulders, which is not the best of signs. There's a left shoulder, a head, and then a right shoulder here. If we continue to fall and we lose this, we could be dumping even more. For AMD, we're on a downtrend. There's no sign of a bounce yet. It tried to break out and it ended up failing. So like NVIDIA, it's going to likely follow what happens, but I wouldn't be surprised if we dip a bit more for like 105. So keep that in mind. For ARM, we're on a bit of a downtrend. We could be dipping a little bit more. We have to see if we could try to hold support, but I do see a risk of us dipping to like 138. So be careful, guys. We may end up dipping for like 138 or below. Coinbase is looking bearish. We're entering this zone I called out. 224 to 216. So look for 220, then 216 as potential targets, and we'll see if we bounce. But there's a risk of some downside. Amazon's rejecting, making lower highs and lower lows. we could be looking for a bigger dip all the way down towards like 210. We'll see if we reclaim 215 or not. Otherwise, we favor 210. For Meta's on a bit of a downwards move right now, right? So we're looking at this 200 EMA. We might be revisiting 657 to 650 for a little bit more downside. There's no sign of a bounce yet. It might be dipping a bit more before it tries that bounce. Microsoft is looking bearish. We could be dipping from 402 to 400. And then Google might be retesting 180 and then 178 before we see some buyers try to defend this. So I'm looking at that very carefully. GameStop has a head and shoulders. Like I said earlier, it looks bearish. Could be dipping to completely fill this gap and dip to 24.5. AMC has a head and shoulders. Could be dipping as well to slowly downtrend for the low threes. DJT is on a bit of a downtrend looking for 24.5 as potential targets. The VIX is a little bit more bullish looking, which tends to be bearish, a bearish signal. However, this is going to be very dependent on what happens with NVIDIA's earnings, so there's no guarantee it lasts. The 10-year is on a bit of a downtrend, and so is the dollar. We're kind of flat right now, so we're just waiting for this big development. But in my honest opinion, the market looks bearish. It's looking like it's making lower highs and lower lows. Yes, we're showing some signs we want a base here, but it might actually push a bit and push a little bit higher in the morning than just reject and continue to fall. There's still a risk of more downside. The bears have a bigger edge for now. But whether or not this lasts depends on two big things. Number one, we have NVIDIA's earnings, and we have some important data coming out later on during the week. I think we have PCE on Friday, so that could be another big factor. And then on top of that, we have Donald Trump's tariffs, especially for next week. So there's going to be some of the major catalysts for this market. With that being said, I thank you all so much for listening. So please have a good rest of your day. I'll be back with another updates tomorrow before market open. Until then, have a good day, guys. Have a good night, and peace out.